global evangelicalism exploding around the world, what are the continuities as well as the discontinuities that you see developing? And I know that's a very hard question to parse because it differs in every cultural expression, as you've already noted, between the UK and the United States. And even within the United States, it depends on denomination, affiliation, so many different pieces. But just to paint with a broad brushstroke, what are the continuities and the discontinuities for our audience and who are looking at it very generally, for them to see? And why should we embrace global evangelicalism or global Christianity, as it were?
Sometimes when I am saddened by symptoms of the decay of the evangelical faith within Great Britain, which I am, I turn my eyes southwards and I see hope. I see new movements developing, existing churches being revitalized, and many, many people becoming Christians. And one of the remarkable things is that there is now developed reverse mission from the global south, so that in Britain, the fastest growing Pentecostal denomination is the Redeemed Church of God in Christ, which is the largest Pentecostal movement in Britain now, and that began in Nigeria only in 1952 and is having an enormous impact with authentic revivals regularly taking place. So I rejoice in the way in which the gospel is being sustained in my own country by influences from abroad. In terms of continuities, I do think that the evangelical movement in the global south is the same thing that we are familiar with in the global north. I did edit a book that came out last summer in July called The Gospel in Latin America, which is a set of lectures given at a conference under the auspices of the Evangelical Studies program at Baylor University, which I coordinate even when I'm not there. And that conference had various speakers, Christian and less specifically Christian speakers, talking about aspects of the historical experience of the evangelical movement in Latin America. And the collection of papers gives a very rich picture of how the movement has taken root. And it is evident from all those papers that there are emphases on Bible, cross, conversion, and activism in all the evangelical movements. Those are the continuities. They're the most obvious continuities. However, there are striking discontinuities. The most obvious one in Latin America is the huge strength of Pentecostalism vis-a-vis other traditional denominations. In most of the lands of Latin America, there are significant elements of the traditional denominations from, that is, the pre-1900 denominations that we are familiar with in the Anglo world. But the denominations that have taken root overwhelmingly, most strongly, are those of Pentecostal lineage, reinforced by charismatic influences from the later 20th century. And I would see charismatic movement as being something distinct from Pentecostalism, but merging with it gradually over time. In the Pentecostal movement, there are the same four emphases, undoubtedly, so that the continuity is there. But the Pentecostal movement has its own distinctives, and those distinctives are apparent in many of the countries, many of the hugely growing churches in Latin America, most obviously in Brazil. And some of the emphases of those churches are on matters that lead to church growth. Others are related to politics. And I have to say that I am a little more troubled by the political side. By and large, I warm to the religious side very strongly, but the political side has various doctrines transplanted from movements in the States which worry me a little. There's the teaching around dominion, for example. The notion of dominion is what can be declared over any given area by proclamation, by the spoken word in some Pentecostal circles, and that leads to political mobilization, which I fear can sometimes be uncritical and troubling, and in the longer term, detrimental to the cause of the spread of the gospel. So I have worries about some aspects of the global evangelical movement as a result, actually, of producing that volume on the gospel in Latin America. However, I'd want to put the emphasis where you put it on the explosion in terms of numbers. And it's not just true of Latin America, of course, it's true of Africa, that substantially Christian continent. It's true of many parts of Asia, which we often forget. In many parts of northern Myanmar, northeastern India, there are huge Christian pockets of strength. Nagaland, for example, one of my favorites, Nagaland, is 85% Baptist. Now, that is a much higher statistic than in Alabama, and that's saying something. Wow. So you have a Christian presence, not just Baptist, Presbyterians and Mizoram, enormously strong. Korea, an enormously missionary-orientated Christian country. There is a remarkable degree of Christian presence in many parts of the world, and it's growing. I'm very keen that that should be studied more and more, hence that volume that came out last year. I'm very keen that those who study it should transmit their message to people who preach about it. I'm very keen that people should preach about it, because that's a real tonic to the spirits in times of decline in the north, in the global north.